Hello and welcome to our session Bill of Lading and Deck Cargo. I already explained before a lot of things, who will be responsible and who will be the carrier and how can we define the carrier. But in this case, we especially will look for deck cargo and if the cargo will be also shipped on deck. The question we always have to raise is, if deck cargo will be shipped under the Hague and Hague-Visby Rule, is the exception clause correctly worded and included in the bill of lading? In some charter parties, the wording, if deck cargo will be transported, is already included and must be used if signing the bill of lading, like in the BIMCO GenCon 22, where it reads, cargo that is carried on deck is carried at the charterer's risk, and the owner are not to be responsible for loss or damage of whatsoever nature and howsoever arising, irrespective of whether or not due to owner's negligence. So that we can see this, there are in charter parties oftentimes such wordings in, that is in the GenCon, and this is that we said here. So this wording here, cargo is carried on deck. And also here, the charterer shall ensure that the bill of lading that are issued in relation to such deck cargo shall record the fact that such cargo has been shipped on deck. And that is expressly done here in this wording. In the NYPE, it's a little bit different, that bill of ladings covered deck cargo shall be claused, shipped on deck at charterer's, shipper's, receiver's risk, expensive and responsibility without liability on the part of the vessel or her owner for any loss, damage, expansion, delay, howsoever cost. So here is not like in the GenCon 22, especially also the nature. That means here the weather condition, whatsoever nature means weather condition as well, that in severe weather condition and cargo will be damaged, that they are not liable for this. No, howsoever is here the general based one. And if we see the Gen-time charter party, they said agreed to be shipped on deck at charter shipper's receiver's risk and responsible for loss or damage, expenses, howsoever cost. That means here also the shipper will be responsible. And for this, if the cargo, as we've seen, is not stored in fully closed container, then we do not need this because it is an exemption. So you see that we have here different wordings, but all the same as howsoever cost. That means the cargo will be actually the loss or damage and also delay, which is not part of the Hague and Hague-Visby Rule, will be covered. So if the delay is not included, then it have to be in the charter party, and everything within the charter party have to be also part of the bill of lading. So if the wording is not correct, which is included in the charter party, what will be the consequence of the carrier? So let's see on hand of example, we have a general cargo purpose vessel which enters the club for P&I risk. The vessel loaded cable reels on deck in Northeast Asia, bound and for discharge in the Middle East under a liner booking note. The deck clause for the later stipulated cargo carried on deck shall be shipped on deck at merchant charterer's risk, expense, and responsibility without liability on the part of the vessel or her owners for any loss, damage, expenses, or delay, howsoever cost. That means this is actually what should be done, or that should be part of the bill of lading. And moreover, the carrier kept liability for loading and discharging of the cargo. That means it clearly was in the charter party that loading and discharging of the cargo shall be arranged by the carrier or his agent. So whoever will be the carrier will be then also responsible for this. And in this case, the charterer was actually claiming that he will be the carrier for this, or that he would arrange it. In the bill of lading, the exclusion clause went as followed later. Here, packages of cable reel shipped on deck at shippers, receivers, charter's risk and responsibility without liability on the part of the vessel owners for any expenses, delay, loss, or damages, howsoever cost. The vessel came across of this voyage with severely bad weather, which put her integrity to the test. She was pitching and rolling severely and most all the time in the Indian Ocean. That was also at the same time the cyclone season, though the bow was constantly diving into the sea. At some point in some time, the lashing of a number of the drums broke and they were lost overboard. So as the vessel now arrives and calls the discharge port, the receiver arrested the vessel and until she was released against an US $2.5 million letter of underwriting. So which means here the cargo receiver first wanted to have the loss back, and then the ship will be released. So what actually was the reason? According to the surveyor who was there at the charging port, there were two effective causes of loss. First, it was the severe weather. That was the first, and not sure if it was the main reason, but the first reason. But another reason, which is also important, insufficient lashing at the loading port. But we remember that actually the carrier should be well responsible for the lashing at the loading port, whoever is a carrier. So now the wording of the exclusion clause here, what we have here, that said howsoever rises, is different to another case, the so-called 3, where it reads any loss or damage and or liability whatsoever nature caused. And this in the so-called 3 did not deal with the question of whether this particular wording exclude liability for loss or damages caused by the owner's negligence or the vessel's unseaworthiness. In the actual case, what we have presented here, the exemption clause reads that the package and cable reels shipped on deck at shippers receive as charter's risk and responsibility without liability on the part of the vessel owner for any expenses, delay, loss, or damage howsoever caused. There's a difference in the words, whatsoever or howsoever. The last one is a word which cannot be topped and actually says that it includes all. That means neglect of the master and also unseaworthiness. Further, in the so-called 3 case, it says whatsoever nature caused, which means that the nature is the natural nature, but does not include anything about negligence or ship owners or unseaworthiness of the ship. So therefore, the carrier in this case was not liable because actually the wording howsoever is the one which is the important one. To be on the safe side, we always should, as we are signing up on behalf of the carrier, we always should check to insert a clause in the bill of lading which is wider than the normal clause, and a recommended clause should be shipped on deck at shipper's charter's risk and responsibility without liability on the part of the vessel owners for any expensive delay, loss, or damage, howsoever important, caused, and even if caused by owners' negligence and unseaworthiness of the vessel. That would actually include everything. Remember that in Canada, they said the word negligent was not included, and therefore the carrier will hold liable. What is in England not the case. In our case, if this is not acceptable, and a lot of charterers or shippers will not accept this, then we should at least write down shipped on deck at shipper's charter's risk and responsibility. That means to include vessel stability and seaworthiness without liability on the part of the vessel owner for any expenses, delay, loss, or damage howsoever caused. But as we see, somewhat surprisingly, as we have seen in another case, the Federal Court of Appeal in Canada recently dismissed an appeal filed by a carrier, thus upholding the earlier decision of the lower court. The appeal court can override such things, which itself was unfavorable to the carrier because the carrier thought that he will be not liable for any damages. Basically, the court found that the carrier was liable for the negligence of the master because the clause quoted above did not contain word negligence. So it was actually this sentence and this exemption clause in the bill of lading, but the the word negligence or seaworthy was missing. So here the lesson to be learned seems to be a careful review of the relevant bill of lading clauses is always warranted when carrying goods on deck, even if the bill of lading appears to have been properly claused to reflect that the carrier is not responsible for loss or damage to the goods whatsoever and howsoever caused. It is possible that the judge might have come to a different result if the printed deck cargo clause had read howsoever cause, including negligence or something similar. Then it's clear. But on the other hand, in 2019, the ELIN, that means April SPA against ELIN Maritime Ltd, they had loaded packages, and there was also the sentence, howsoever arises, that was deck cargo. Here, the judge was in front of the English court. The judge said, as a matter of plain language and good commercial sense, a clause providing that the carrier will not be liable for loss or damage to deck cargo, howsoever arising, will be effective to exclude liability for the carrier's negligence or its failure to exercise due diligence to make the vessel seaworthy. So the judge says, words of exemption which are wider in effect than howsoever caused are difficult to imagine, and over the last 100 years, they have become the classic phrase, whereby to exclude liability for negligence and unseaworthiness. So which means this, if it is the English law, it means if the law of arbitration is in England, then this is fully enough to exclude the liability of the carrier for damages or loss of the cargo, if or here delay is included, if the cargo will be delayed due to this fact and due to the negligence or unseaworthiness of the ship. So that is actually clearly said. But always be reminded that it might be that in different countries where we have in Canada, for example, if it is Vancouver for the arbitration court, or we have it in Germany for the arbitration court, there are different, let's say, approaches to this, and it might be not sufficient, so that we really have to write down owner's negligence or unseaworthiness of the vessel. So therefore, to finalize this, if the master, you at the master have to sign the bill of lading, you call the company if there are special requirements which have to be included, which are maybe not part of the charter party where this sentence is, but they said or agreed negligence unseaworthiness of the vessel to include. If not, then we are following the charter party and the sentence given in the charter party, because the charter party is actually a contract between the ship owner and the charterer. And then if this sentence in, we have to use the sentence. And in this sentence, and what we have seen in the charter parties, you always will have howsoever arises, and that means you are normally excluded from any liability. Okay, I hope you learned a little bit and you gained some more knowledge. And I say goodbye and see you next time.